everybody. Welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. My story today for you that I've researched is about a woman who went through a plane crash, if you will. It crashed after the fact. Let's just put it that way. It's when the brakes went out on her plane that she was on, and that led to a story and a beautiful testimony. So I'm going to get into that today. So stay tuned and we'll jump in. It was August of 2002 when a woman named Diana Burgess, she had gotten up for work, and what she did for her career, she was a flight care nurse, and she loved her job. She was great at it. It was a rewarding career, and not only was she just a flight nurse, but she was actually a chief flight nurse, so very cool. Diana had a husband and 2 kids, and she was always on the go. She was a woman that just went for what she needed to do or wanted to do. She was very outgoing. She didn't have any problems with it, with balancing work. She was an aerobics instructor. She was on the praise team at her church, not to mention raising her family. So many things she was juggling, but she did it well. And Diana often thanked God for all the blessings that she had in her life. However, at the time, she didn't realize that she wasn't acknowledging that she was trying to do it all on her own accord with no help. She thought she could do everything on her own, and she never consulted with God to see what He wanted or how He wanted her to do something. In April of that year of 2002, Diana celebrated her 40th birthday. Friends and family were over, and they were just cutting up, joking, laughing. They were having a great time. You know how you do when you get around friends and family. They start reminiscing and laughing. And her older sister even gave her a kind of funny but cute gift. It was a keychain that had an inscription on it that said, "I'm not bossy. I just have better ideas." So, as I said, Diana knew God. She was a believer. And she knew that she had the power within her, which was the same power that rose Christ from the grave. But the problem was, she never tapped into that. Instead, she always relied on her own self, her own abilities, as I said earlier, doing it all her way, thinking she had everything under control. Well, she says God chose to teach her a powerful truth, and it was rather unusual, you could say, and quite painful. So on that day where she was working, it was a beautiful sunny day, no bad weather. She gets up, she gets ready for her day, and she's going to be transporting a 76-year-old woman and her husband. And they would be going back to Lexington, Kentucky, where the patient was from. So they were just taking them back home. And the plane, the Learjet that she works on, it was going to be going from San Marco, Florida, as I said, back to Kentucky. On the plane was the captain, aka the pilot. His name was Miles. There was a co-pilot named Jim, who also went by Jimmy. Then there was Diana and her patient, the 76-year-old woman, and the patient's husband. Now, usually on these flights when she's working, there's at least 2 medical staff. But for whatever reason on that day, Diana was the only one aboard. The patient herself had lung cancer, and it was pretty advanced and pretty bad, so much so that the patient had even signed a DNR, do not resuscitate. Diana's doing her thing. She's attaching all the monitors to the woman. She's getting her oxygen started up, making sure the patient's buckled in well as the husband. Then Diana herself goes to buckle up. She sits in the jump seat that is adjacent to the cockpit. Now, the flight itself, as I said, it was going normal because the weather was great. And they were just 20 minutes from Kentucky when they began their descent. And right before she buckled up again, she made sure all the equipment was safe, patient buckled in, everything good. She gets buckled back up, and 20 minutes, they'll be touched down. Well, at 1 p.m. on that Friday of Labor Day weekend, the plane finally landed. It touched down. Now, when it touched down, Diana says she did this all the time, right? So she would know what feels abnormal. She said the plane did not slow. You know how when you land in a plane and it's zooming, but it comes to a stop pretty quick, right? Well, it wasn't doing that. It was still going 150 miles per hour. Now, in this moment, Diana says she did not panic. And the reason being, she knew the plane had a backup system. It was called the reverse thrusters. And basically, that would force the thrust of the engine, and it would force it to go from back to front, which provided drag, thereby allowing it to slow the forward momentum. But the backup reverse thrusters failed too. And the pilot, Miles, he tried his best to do everything he could, but nothing was helping or working. And the only thing left to do now was to pull the emergency brake, going 150 miles an hour. Just saying that sounds terrifying. That's when Jim, the co-pilot, screams out, "Hold on, brace, hold on, everybody." The aircraft actually ends up going over the runway. It then flew out of control over a 60-foot cliff and landed into a deep ditch. Now, before that, as it's on the runway, once that emergency brake had been pulled or pushed or however it is, the plane changed direction. And that was a lifesaver because had it not been pulled when it was, they would have hit this big concrete pole. They would have probably all died if that had happened. So when it was pulled, changed the direction. It did hit something, but at least it wasn't a cement pole. It hit this wooden ILS structure. And basically that's just an aid on the runways for pilots, and they use it for guidance. But like I said, at least it was wooden. The impact of it tore off the whole right wing of the plane. In addition, along with half of the onboard fuel supply. So, as I said earlier, it goes over the cliff and lands in a deep ditch. When it hit the side of the ditch, it sheared off the landing gear. The plane's obviously on fire from all this going on, so it's finally skids on its belly to a final stop in that ditch when it hits the side of it. Now, I forgot to mention as well, before hitting the ditch, when it went over the cliff, in addition, it went over 6 lanes of a major freeway. Now, miraculously, no cars got hit. No one was hurt. So it's just like it went free across 6 lanes, hitting nothing, but then landing in the ditch. Once it finally made that impact into that side of the ditch, shooting pain just went up Diana's legs and back. And she said it was excruciating.
No brakes, no brakes. I didn't panic at that point because I knew we had that backup system, which is called the reverse thrusters. And I watched him pull back on that and nothing. And then I was getting more terrified. By the second, I was very much aware that we were crashing.
Did you ever think that the end was near? I mean, did you say, this is it?
I never said this is it, but I knew the severity of the situation, how dire it was, because I was trying to do things so quickly.
This is the end of the runway in Lexington, Kentucky. And this is Versailles Road, a major thoroughfare. Diana's plane careened off that 60-foot cliff and came across 6 lanes of traffic going 200 miles an hour on a Friday afternoon. The traffic light 100 yards in front of me and the one behind me were both red, stopping traffic. They didn't hit a single car.
Diana is basically going in and out of consciousness. But amazingly, when she is conscious, she can remember and assess the situation of where everybody is and what's going on. She saw that the pilot, Miles, was unconscious and he had blood coming from his head. Her patient wasn't responding when she'd call out to her. In fact, she was slumped over and unconscious. And behind her, where her husband was sitting, he was also slumped over and unconscious. At a point where she is conscious, Diana, she can hear Jimmy, the co-pilot, and he's moaning. So she, asks him, "Are you okay?" And he told her that he couldn't move his legs and he was pretty sure that his back was broken. Now, witnesses from this day that saw this all occur, they say that they could see the actual flames from the plane about 100 feet into the air. It's not long before Diana realizes they are in a blazing inferno. They're trapped. She quickly undid her belt and she couldn't stand or move. We'll go into her injuries in a second. But she tries to lean because the door's not too far from her, and she tries to work and try to get it open, but to no avail, she can't. She can hear the people on the outside. Bystanders were trying to break open the door to get to the survivors and help them. And so she didn't, all this confusion and in and out of consciousness during this moment, Diana doesn't realize why she can't stand up. It's hurting, it's excruciating, but she's not looking down. She's terrified of a blazing inferno. But her actual injuries, this is why she couldn't stand up. So on impact, her lower leg bones of both legs had been shoved up behind the upper leg bones. That sounds very painful. So you can imagine that tore all the ligaments as well. And of course, when that happened, it caused a posterior knee dislocation. Now, in addition, major arteries that supplied her lower legs with blood, they had ruptured. So, Diana was bleeding internally and she did not know it at the time. Also, Diana had fractured her upper back, and that particular injury caused her right lung to collapse. So this poor woman is in awful condition. In fact, it's very critical. And as the flames, it's getting hotter, the smoke's getting more thick. Diana's scared. She didn't know what else to do. Nothing's working. The door's not opening. She begins yelling out a prayer, crying to Jesus, "Jesus, save us, please. Jesus, save us now." Like so many of these stories that I do, this seems to be that happen quite often where people call out Jesus and he saves them. So she's just saying this over and over, this prayer. She doesn't know what else to do. When this is happening, the pilot finally comes to life. He awakens from his unconsciousness, and he says that he felt a gentle shake and a whisper in his ear saying, "Miles, open the door." He can't see Diana because of the smoke, but he hears her in the distance praying, "God, Jesus, please help us, save us now." So he knows it wasn't her whispering in his ear and shaking him. So he's like, okay, he decides to get up the best he could. He's stumbling. He makes his way to the door. He lifts the latch and it falls right off into the grassy knoll outside. The bystanders that were trying to work from the outside of the plane now are able to come in and start pulling out everyone inside. There happened to be an off-duty firefighter that day who also worked as a horse jockey. Now, he was there, saw it happen, and he goes in to help pull the co-pilot, Jimmy, out of the cockpit. Oddly enough, no one could get to him. I guess the hole was small or the way the plane was damaged. So no one was small enough to get in there and try to help, except this man, because he was so small in stature, because he was a jockey. Also, side note, interestingly enough, this same man, the horse jockey, had failed a physical agility test for for being a firefighter just a week prior. Yet on this day, he was able to reach Jimmy, and Jimmy's no small man. Jimmy is 6 foot, 270 pounds. He was able to get to him and pull him out. I hope whoever runs those tests saw this, heard this at the time back in 2002 and decided to say, okay, I think you passed your physical, never mind. Unfortunately, Diana's patient, the 76-year-old woman, did pass away. But her husband and both pilots were rushed to the nearest hospital by ambulance. Because of Diana being so critical, she couldn't go by ambulance, so they care flighted her to the nearest level 1 trauma center. When she got there and they're evaluating her, they told her before they rushed her to surgery that they would probably have to amputate her legs. Her 19-year-old son also got there before she had to go in for surgery, and he came in crying and pleading just that for his mother not to die. So very sad. But also, he told her that, look, Mom, I already got a big prayer chain going. So just that statement gave Diana a peace and a calmness before going in for surgery where she might very well die. As she's being prepped in the OR, she asks the medical staff if they would say a prayer for her. Like she would pray out loud and they'd bow their heads and pray with her. And she said in that moment you could hear a pin drop because I guess they were so thrown back by no one ever asked them that before, but they obliged. They did so, and Diana said a beautiful prayer, and the medical staff that would be working on her in the OR did as well. And that's the last thing Diana remembers for a full week. The surgery itself lasted 13 to 14 hours. During it, she had to have 10 units of blood transfused because she had lost so much. And while she was on the operating table, she almost died several times. Now, once the surgery was over, because she pulled through, they obviously put her on a ventilator and in the ICU for 7 days because she was so critical. Her body needed time for rest and healing to begin. So that's the reason for that. But there were a lot of complications during that 7 days in the ICU. One being she had a fever of 104. That's very dangerous for adults. In addition, she got a bleeding disorder. She also battled kidney and lung failure. And statistically, doctors said she should have died. But God, he had other plans for Diana. When Diana finally awoke a week later, she says she had 10-pound fixator rods coming out of her ankles and connected and going up to her hips. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but it looks excruciating if you've ever seen a patient have that. And she said it was. She said the pain was indescribable. Her lower legs themselves were filleted open, she said. Ugh. And anytime she would make the smallest little nudge of a movement, she could feel the metal rods just rubbing up against her skin. And then that would cause more excruciating pain. You know, to help her during this tough time, friends and family would visit her often. They would read scripture to her. They would pray with her, play praise and worship music. They would try to do anything to help her to get her mind off of the pain. And the doctors at this time told Diana that she would need several more surgeries, especially on her knees. And at that same time, they also told her that she would most likely never walk again. Well, after 3 weeks goes by, Diana begs her husband to take her home to Florida. She's tired of being in Kentucky. But before that was done, she had to have a second surgery. So the second surgery was done, and then she was flown with medical staff on a plane back to Florida. She didn't get to go home right away because she's still critical and she's, still needs a lot of care. So she did go back to her home state, but once she got there, she had to go to another trauma center. She was there about 2.5 more weeks at that trauma center in Florida, where she then had to have another surgery. After that surgery is when she finally got to go back to home. She still wasn't in the clear because she still needed 24/7 care. So her family took turns caring for her during that time, helping her till, she could get up on her own, hopefully. She said it was a struggle. It was a struggle because of the unbearable pain. Then she had to go to this outpatient therapy 3 times a week. And you know how that is. If you've ever had a major injury and you're having outpatient therapy, it's excruciating trying to work back to where you were, and get your limbs moving. It's a slow process and a painful one. Also, during this time, Diana just hated being so reliant on everybody, especially putting that on her family, which they gladly did it because that was their mom, their wife, things like that. But if you're the patient or the one needing all the help, you hate it. You can't do anything for yourself. So this was a very trying time. She said to get through it all, she relied on God's word and his promises. She would think upon different stories in the Bible, like all the healings that God did, Jesus performed, when God parted the Red Sea, when Jesus walked on water, all these things she would think upon and she would read. And that was encouraging during this tough time. She thought about things, finally, like, wow, God saved me from a burning plane. And just thinking that gave her the oomph, I guess you could say, determination. That's what I was thinking. Gave her the determination to say, I am going to walk again. So all this is going by in the next 2 years, slowly but surely. She says God worked on her over that 2-year period as well as she's going through all this pain and suffering. He began to take away her control, her pride, her impatience. But he didn't just take that away. He replaced it with something much more beautiful. He replaced it with the fruits of the Spirit. Things like peace, mercy, patience, goodness, joy, all these wonderful things. She saw it and felt it, and it was a beautiful change. Also, she decided to, you know what? I'm going to praise and thank God no matter what I'm feeling, no matter how painful it is today. She decided to do that, and she didn't want to focus on the negative. When she did that, praised and thanked God, no matter what, things were great or things were bad, she noticed something. She noticed her pain would subside. And she said that her spirit, it would just lighten. It wouldn't feel so heavy. And Diana not only survived this whole ordeal, she thrived. And she slowly over those 2 years got back most all of her strength. And she did walk again. In fact, I believe she became an aerobics instructor again after that. I mean, it's quite amazing. She did have some pretty horrific scars on her legs that, you can't do anything about that. And that got her down in the beginning, having that visible, and people would stare and look or ask her about it. It was just, she hated it really. But her daughter ended up doing something so beautiful. On a Mother's Day, she wrote her mother a poem. Diana began to look at her scars differently. She no longer saw them as ugly and why, and the negativity can, like, oh, I went through this horrific thing. After she received that poem, she started thinking of her scars as a reminder of God's miraculous intervention. These scars gave Diana a chance to tell her story to people that would ask her, oh, what happened? Oh, I see you have some scars. That gave her another chance and another, and she began to see it as something so beautiful. Diana then began to branch out and speak with schools, churches, women's groups, civil functions, and, more and more people heard her story. Eventually, she also did work again, but, it wasn't as a flight nurse. She could no longer do that, but she got a job at St. Petersburg College of Nursing, and she worked as an adjunct clinical instructor. And a quote by Diana, I'll read it here. Although he chose in love to change my path, my character, my goals, and my ambitions through a difficult trial, praise God, he remains the same, and I can trust him always. End quote. So what a story, guys. Beautiful story. One that I just had to do when I saw it. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. I appreciate you for being here, for watching, and for finding these things and these miraculous stories just as interesting as I do. So thank you. I hope you have a great week, and I'm going to see you guys next time.